Hello everyone, I'm Paul. I am Shadow Trooper designation TX11386. I'm also the owner of Tramp, or to give it its full name, Trooper Amp. And I have been asked if I would do a short-ish video of the tools that I use every day and the most useful ones. So that's what we're going to do. So let's kick this off with, as I say, the most useful. By far, the single most useful tool that I have is Blu-Tack. And this is used for everything. I use this for if I need to glue some parts. I can simply pop a blob down, stick the parts in there, glue them, away we go. You can hold them while you do some intricate painting. You can use them for example, I use this a lot for covering up or masking. So for example, if I wanted to paint the base of this gun here, but I didn't, oops, there's the camera, sorry, but I didn't want to actually put masking tape over here, I can just take a blob of that, stick it in, form it. I'll only do it roughly now, but you can take your time, form it, spray over, and then pull it out. It's the simplest and easiest and most effective masking tool that I have. Just a simple blob of Blu-Tack. It's also perfect for those of you who solder. You may well be used to using what are called helping hands, which are usually just a little stand which is weighted, and it has various implements attached to it, like it could be a magnifying glass, but most importantly it will have little arms with crocodile clips that will come over to hold on to PCBs and so on while you solder them. Now they're all well and good, but I prefer just a blob of Blu-Tack. So we whack that down, we take a piece of solder, we solder away, we take some wire, we solder the wire to it, whatever we need to do. You can even, if you wish, hold the two parts together like that and solder away. It's the simplest and most effective tool that I have, that I use every single day. Blu-Tack. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Okay, next thing, knives. Now I know we all have a good knife. My particular knife of choice is a surgical scalpel. Now this is just a simple, plain scalpel, nothing more. It's called a number 3 if you want to know, and it takes number 10 blades. You can get obviously blades in various sizes, lengths, shapes, etc. But this is the type of blade that I use the most, and this works for me perfectly well. I've used one of these for years, never gone wrong. If you do cut yourself with it, it's so sharp you hardly notice it anyway, so it's all good. It comes with, I know a lot of people use snap-off blades and I can't remember, X-Acto knives and things like that, which come out, extend out with the blade. You snap a piece off when it gets blunt, etc., and roll it in and out. And that's fine if you prefer that, nothing wrong with that. But like I say, myself, I prefer these surgical blades. Come in their own packets. And you just replace one for one, slip one out, slip a new one in. Brand new, surgically sharp blade. So that's my weapon of choice when it comes to knives. As well as this kind of a blade, I very often will use something like this. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. It's like a mini pizza cutter, but it is razor sharp. And you just run it along a line. You can actually use it with a ruler. So you just put the ruler down, lean it in, run along. That wasn't very good of me, but anyway, run along and it will give you an almost surgical cut. Very, very, very sharp. In fact, I'll show you just a tiny piece of paper here. Done. Nice and easy, nice and sharp. I can't remember where I got this. I think, if I remember correctly, I actually saw it in a pound shop somewhere. Or for various people, that might be called a dollar store, but we call them pound shops over here. And so I picked it up, thought it might be useful, and it turns out I use it all of the time. And it's still razor sharp. So that's the mini pizza cutter and a scalpel. So next up we have another thing I can't live without. Tweezers. Various different types, various different sizes, various different shapes to do various different tasks. we have some very, very fine tweezers here. And these are great for holding on to, for example, surface mount devices. Anything that's really, really, really tiny. Like if you heat up one of these tiny little resistors here, then these great big mandibles aren't going to be no good for it. And so you end up using something as tiny as that, and you can just heat it up, pop that resistor off. It's a capacitor actually, not a resistor. So they're brilliant, use those a lot. There's various types of this kind of tweezer, once it focuses, there we go. And these are a non-conductive, almost carbon tip. I'm not sure what they're made of in actual fact. There's a little bit of give in them, but they're really, really strong, and they're totally non-conductive. Use these a lot, again, as I say. If I'm reaching down inside of something, especially with this particular board, which is a battery charger, so there's always a battery attached to here when it's in circuit. And if I want to hold it in place while I glue it, again, the last thing I want to do is hold it with a metal pair of tweezers for obvious reasons. So something like this is perfect. Like I say, they're almost carbon. They look carbon, but obviously they're not, because carbon is conductive. So it's some kind of high density plastic, I would think. But yeah, you can hold on to anything electrical, totally non-conductive, totally safe, even when it's powered up. Brilliant little things. These tweezers here, the little bent neck, I suppose you'd call them, bent neck tweezers. I cannot live without these. I simply use these hundreds of times every day. There's a slightly bigger version, which is used for manlier jobs, but these are my tweezers of choice. I have these for years. I can't even remember where I got them or why I got them, but they're fantastic. Tweezers. Cannot live without them. They're used for everything. In addition to the standard type of grip to hold tweezers, you also have this sort of thing, which I use fairly often. And these are self-gripping tweezers. Okay. So the idea behind this is, again, if I was with the guns, a lot of the guns that I make, especially the E11s, these are sat down inside, these boards rather, are sat down inside of the end of the main barrel, and they're glued in there, and they're plastic welded in there. So I need to actually have a way of holding a board like this in place while I glue it, and these tweezers are fantastic for that. Again, you just hold it on the edge. They are conductive, obviously, because they're metal, so I don't hold it across the whole thing. You just hold it on the edge of the board, and they're so strong that will hold it perfectly in a vice-like grip. Fantastic little tweezers, and I cannot recommend something like that highly enough. It's a great, great tool to have. Tweezers are varying kind. You can never go wrong. Never have too many tweezers. So that's those. Pens. We all need to mark things. Now, I've gone through various different types of pens in my life, but of course we keep coming back to the old Sharpie. There's nothing special about them, just Sharpies, but they are fantastic. Get yourself a set, you won't go wrong. As well as Sharpies, I've had this particular little, they're called clutch pencils. So you just push the end, out comes a lead. This was a draftsman's pencil, and I've had this for more years than I care to remember. It must be, it's got to be 25 plus years. I've just had this one single pencil, keep getting new leads. And you know, when you find something that works, you just keep it. So, a good pencil, very, very important. As well as the tweezers and things, I also use, it's a bit frightening, but they're dental tools. Again, they're very, very useful to have. Different tools of different types and shapes and sizes with different ends on there to do different things. This is a little hook pick. I don't even know what that's called. It's almost like a shepherd's crook. And then we have various pointy things which would normally cause you untold amounts of pain. But again, these are very good, for example, as I showed you earlier with masking off. I'll just take a piece of Blu-Tack again, and we can pop this in the end. There we go. Now you can use one of these tools, or any type. You guys use a cocktail stick if you wished, but obviously I'm familiar with these. So you can then use these just to actually make a better job of a mask. There you go. Within a few seconds, you're there. Very useful tools. This one obviously is a mirror they use to look inside your mouth. I also use this to look down inside, for example, the insides of a gun or something that I'm working on, to see what's going on, see if there's any wires broken. It's very useful for fault finding from that point of view. So a nice little mirror. I do have other ones, obviously, that are extendable, different sizes, have lights on, etc. and so forth. But a set of tools like these you will find many, many, many uses for. If something's lost down inside a gun, you can stick a hook down, pull it out, you know, all sorts of things. Great tools to have. Let's pop this aside. You can get, of course, these are available in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, the dental tools. But I highly recommend getting a set of various different types, because they are useful and you will be surprised at the uses you find for them. Again, you know, you can use them for scratching, picking paint out. If you want to do some specific weathering, you can scratch with these. There's different types, sizes, paddle-shaped, sharp, blunt, etc. You can cause all sorts of little tiny nicks and damages and scrapes and things just by using different size heads and different type tools. So they're multi-function, multi-use. Something less dangerous. Some of you will know these, some of you won't know these. These are known as trim tools. Now again, there's multiple different types, they're used for different things, but essentially what I use these for is if I'm doing, let's say for example, I'm working on an E11. Before I put the electronics in, I need to strip it all down, so I will use this specifically to hook under here, give it a lever, and out pops the T-track. Nice and simple. It won't damage anything. It's quite thick plastic. It's not totally rigid. There is some give in all of these things. You don't want them to be totally rigid because it will scar whatever you're working on. You can see they're quite well used. All of them are very well used, in fact. So the different sizes for different jobs, different strengths that you need to lever things, etc. But the idea is that these trim tools are used a lot in the automobile industry for getting off the inside of the cabin trims, because that stuff is so easily marked. You don't want to use a screwdriver to start levering the plastic clips in and out. So you put a trim tool in and lever it, and out will come the clip. Brilliant tools. Very, very cheap. Very, very handy and very, very useful. So next up, drills. Now we all love a good drill, a good sharp drill, and these are my particular favorites. Again, these are various sizes, but with these you may or may not be able to see. Hopefully you can see in the video. Yeah, you can. They actually come with a point on the front, so they're not beveled like a normal drill, and this allows you to have pinpoint accuracy when you want to drill. It starts off with a very, very fine point, and you drill that down, and you, as I say, get pinpoint accuracy. Various sizes, various shapes, to do various jobs, of course. And they will go down a lot smaller. This one only goes down to 3. I have another set which extends down below that. Used every single day. While we're talking about tools, drills rather, there are various other things that I use, again on a daily basis. Hole extenders. So this is 4 to 20, so you would make a hole of whatever shape, size you wanted, and then you can use this to cut down through it. And this makes a really, really nice even hole, where a drill can bite and gouge, especially as you're going up through the larger sizes. Let's say you wanted to make a 20mm hole, you'd have to put multiple drills in order to gradually escalate the whole size up. But with something like this, just a nice hole cutter, it will do it gradually and easily. And you can get them, as you can see, pardon me, as you can see, into various sizes. This is 20, this goes up to 32. I don't use that one very often, but occasionally. As well as those, you have these hole makers. Now these are more aggressive, but again, if they're handled properly, they're very, very, very good. And just like the drills, they have a sharp point to start off. So you would make an indentation or even a pilot hole with a drill, a small hole there, and then you would go in with this, just using a standard, for instance mine's a Makita, but just a standard drill, and away you go. Various sizes. This one's 20, this one's 20, nope, sorry, that was 30. There we go, 25, 30, and 35. So I use these all the time on the E11s. This one is used inside of the scopes to hollow that out, so that will be used in there to hollow out the scope, get rid of all the resin on the solid scopes. And then these two are used on the end cap to hollow out the end cap when I cut that off ready to put the speaker in. And they make very short work of any resin that might need to come out. Very short work indeed. They're very sharp, so you do need to be careful. And obviously they do blunten over time, but where they're only mild steel, you can sharpen them up quite nicely, just with a normal file. So there we go. Very, very useful piece of kit. And I use these on a daily basis. One of these will be used. One of those things that I just simply cannot live without is these. Well, we're talking about drills, and I mentioned pilot holes and punches. This is a very nice, simple little hole punch, and it just works with pressure. In fact, I'll use a little piece of plastic so you can see it. Nice piece of clear plastic, a few scratches and dings, but just put that where you want the hole, push down, and as you can see, it punches just a little tiny hole in, where you would then come in with one of these, pop it in the hole. Oops, that's my butter fingers. Pop it in the hole and away you go, and it'll just cut through. A hole punch is very, very useful indeed, and I cannot live without this particular thing. Again, used on a daily basis. All of these tools that you will see in this video are pretty much used on a daily basis, either one or all or many of them. We touched briefly on soldering just now, so this little thing, some of you may or may not know them, some of you may or may have seen them in this sort of format. This used to have a backstop on here, but I cut it off because I found it got in the way. They're called solder suckers, and they do exactly what it says on the tin. You would heat up a joint, come in with a solder sucker. Once it's heated up, suck the solder out. Now these ones, they're cheap and cheerful. They do the job, not too bad. But last year, I was recommended this, and it is by far the best solder sucker I have used in my 40 years of doing this sort of thing. I wish I'd found them many years ago. And this one's called, it's almost rubbed off actually, an Engineer SS02, Engineer, sorry, A-N-G-I-N-E-E-R, an SS02 solder sucker. Absolutely marvellous thing. Every time you suck up a joint, all the solder comes off, and you just expel it out through the end. And on the end here is just a little piece of silicone tubing. You can see that tiny little piece. The actual main end is metal, not like these cheap ones. These cheap ones are some kind of silicone based, I believe. But this totally metal parts, except for this part, which is mild silicone. And the reason for that is when you're working on a PCB, especially some of the smaller ones with the surface mount components and things like that, when you start heating them up, the last thing you want to do is have a hard edge that can damage any of the components. And these, although they're good, they do have a hard edge, as you can hear. Whereas with something like this, you can push it in quite soft, and you can make sure that the entire joint is covered by the end of the soft silicone. Now, many years ago I used to put soft silicone over the end of here, but I didn't so recently. And now I don't need to because I got that one. Best solder sucker I've ever seen. Now, if I can get that the right way up for you to read it, I believe it's that. There we go. There you go. Get yourself one of those. You won't regret that. What's next? Okay, cutting things again. Now, obviously, many of you use saws to cut things, and I'm no different. However, I use probably different kind of saws than what you might be used to seeing. These are called razor saws. They're actually Japanese in origin, and the Japanese model makers, if you've ever seen them, are incredibly intricate and incredibly accurate, and their cuts are absolutely paper thin. And that's due to these razor saws, and they're called that for a reason. I don't even think I can focus in on that. It's so thin. There we go. You can see it's almost as thin and sharp as the surgical blade of the scalpel. Absolutely wonderful things. And if you need to cut, especially, for example, when I have to cut the end cap off of here, if I use a normal saw, I'm going to lose a couple of millimeters, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things isn't a lot, but I'd rather not lose it if I can help it. And especially with some of the more detailed models, if you're cutting across a seam, you want to keep that seam as accurate as possible and leave as little trace that you may have cut across it as possible. And so these saws, these razor saws, are absolutely perfect for that. And I'll give you a quick demonstration of what I mean. Again, the various shapes and sizes. Most of them cut also, incidentally, on the back stroke, not the forward stroke, because it's a lot easier and more natural to cut coming backwards than it is to try and force. If you force something, most of you at some point will have used a wood saw, and you've seen the size of the teeth on a wood saw. They're quite pronounced, and they're all forward facing, so as soon as you try and cut, it digs in and you can't get anywhere. Whereas with one of these, if you do a forward cut, the teeth are so sharp it will go in slightly, and there's absolutely no resistance going backwards and forwards. And you can see how quickly, just holding it in my hands, that's almost through in 4 or 5 cuts. And this is 3mm ABS, so it's not the toughest material in the world, but then you're not going to be cutting the toughest material in the world with something that's paper thin, although they are quite sturdy. So you can see here with this saw, it's a slightly wider blade. It's probably about just about a millimeter. Whereas this one, if I cut next to it, you see that's about 1/2 millimeter line, and it's still all the way through, just like the other one. So these things are amazing. Razor saws. They come with various, this one came with these blades plus one more, which is so small it's pointless using for the kind of work that we do. But these are interchangeable on this blade, although you don't actually need them. This one I use, and this one I use without the need for the handle, because they are so sharp they make short work of everything. There we go, and you can see that's a thicker blade again. So there's 3 different sizes of cut there, but all of them are super easy to use. Razor saws, get yourself a set. These, actually, something like this is incredibly useful. Pardon me. For example, if I wanted to cut, let's say I wanted to cut this off, if it was glued on here and I wanted to cut it off. Now with a normal saw, obviously you can go in and you can get through there, but then you're stuck with this bit. You could mess around with a standard saw. Let's just see if I can grab what I mean. So you could work with a standard mini hacksaw. You could put it to cut that one, and then you'd have to faff around down here trying to do this, trying not to damage anything. Standard saws are great, but but they do move, they do blunt very easily. However, something like this, you can get right down in there. You can even go through that side if you wanted to. Where's the light? There we go. You can go through that side if you wanted to, so you can get through tiny little places in order to cut holes. You can even do it, I've used this to cut down inside of a barrel, and use just the very tip of it and worked that gradually. Let's see how I do it. There we go. So even just using the tip of it, you can see how quickly and easily that cuts, and that's only moving a few millimeters each time. But that again will cut 3mm ABS and various other obviously materials, but that will cut incredibly easily. So these are not called razor saws for no reason. They really are razor saws. I will say be careful with them, because if you cut yourself with them, it is very easy to go right through down to the bone. I have cut myself with them, and it has been rather deep, and it has needed a lot of super glue in order to fix it. So do be careful. They're not called razor saws for no reason. Okay, next up. Scissors. Cannot underestimate how important it is to have a really good pair of scissors. Now these I've had for a while. I can't even remember the proper name for them. I know there is a proper name for them, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I should have looked that up, my apologies. But yeah, these are a great pair of scissors. I've never had to sharpen them, and they are still as razor sharp as the day I got them, even right towards the end. They were just nip, 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 and they're absolutely nip, nip, nip. Absolutely perfect. These are actually precision garden shears, as you can see there. You can use them as standard scissors. They do have a slightly serrated edge, which can be a bit of a problem sometimes, or a bit of a pain if you're making an incredibly fine cut. But I use these for cutting the ABS. So where you saw the razor saw can cut it easily, these can just pop in there, and off comes a piece. Any size, any shape, and it's such little effort to cut through this 3mm ABS. It's nothing. Precision garden shears, incredibly useful. Again, you can do right at the end as well. You can take little tiny snippets down inside of a barrel if you need to cut some wires. Very, very, very useful. And again, used every single day in one form or another. These garden shears, I've had them for a while. They've not let me down yet. I hope they don't do tomorrow, I haven't said that. So these are by Amtech, if you want to get these. No, I keep turning it around the wrong way, there we go. You see that? Amtech. Precision garden shears. Very, very, very useful. Obviously, they will cut other things. They're good for cutting material, paper, cardboard, whatever you want. They will cut tin quite easily. They will cut 3D prints as well, and it will give you a nice straight cut on 3D prints, because prints can be a bit problematic, especially with all the inside filament. I should mention actually, although one edge is ever so slightly serrated, the other is completely flat. So that's scissor-like, and that's, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, there you go. Micro teeth in there, so it's ever so finely serrated. But these are fantastic things. Fantastic things. Okay, next, we talked about the tweezers, but in conjunction with the tweezers, I also use a pair of these. Now these are long forceps, and obviously they are lockable, which is useful. So these are used predominantly, again, if you need to get down. I do a lot of my work on guns, so I'm very often working down inside the barrel, holding an LED for gluing it, or even taking bits and pieces apart. So I need a way to be able to get in and out of the barrel. So these are incredibly useful. Just pop them in there, single click, and it's not going anywhere. You can hold it. You can even use them as holding hands where you solder if you want to, but very, very useful. Again, for holding wires, or you solder them down inside of a barrel, whatever it may be, just click them together and away you go. So these come in various shapes and sizes, but this is the only one I've ever actually had to use, because it's long and thin enough to get everywhere that I need it to go. also very useful if you drop nails down in awkward places. You can get them with these, especially if you stick a magnet on the end. Just a little tip. So as well as scissors, another very important thing is pliers and cutters. Now there are obviously a myriad of different sizes, shapes, abilities, but these are by far my favorite, and these are the only 4 that I use. And these ones not so much because they're more heavy duty, but I do use them. However, these 3, especially these 2, again on a daily basis, all of this stuff is stuff that I cannot live without. A very, very good pair of snips. Now you can see by the state of these, I've had them a while, and they've never let me down. I have gone through various different types. You can get, I'm just going to show you some older ones that I have. Once I can find them. Oh, here we go. So you can get all sorts of different types. These are side cutters, standard side cutters, but I found that these sorts of things blunt very, very quickly and very, very easily, whereas these have not yet let me down. And again, if they do blunt, you just take a file, just a quick go over the end, and they're razor sharp again. I love these things, little side cutters. End snippers. Now these are not used so much for cutting off component legs, because you can see they're dual beveled, so they'll both come down into a point. You can see that there. There you go. But these are very good for nipping off the ends of plastic, for example, or if you need to make a larger cut in something, they will do that quite easily. Very strong, very strong. I've had these a while, haven't broken them yet. Quite happy with these. These are Draper. Long nose pliers, again for the same sorts of reason as these things, really, is literally just for holding on to things or retrieving things from down inside awkward places. But again, used daily. So that's some of those. And to finish off the plier-like portion, if you like, is some wire strippers. Now again, wire strippers come in various shapes and sizes, various different types to do various different specific tasks. But you can see by the state of these that I've had these a long time, and they have not let me down. You quite simply pop in a wire in here. The spring's going a little bit, so I have to hold the neck, but that's no hardship. And away you go, and it's cut. You can see that little piece of strip wire. Again, very easy. It'll do multi-size as well. So this is a little piece of ribbon cable. Just goes in there. It'll do larger wires. It'll do multi-gauge. Doesn't matter what you have. This thing will cope with it. The only thing I will say, and this has bitten me, is you can see in here a wire cutter. And this is exactly the same as these things. In fact, it's actually more like these things. It's more of a scissor action because it comes together and overlaps. Alright. So if you do get something like this and it has this function, be very, very careful. Last year I was using some of these, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning and I was working away and I wasn't paying attention. And I put that in there and I held it, but I put my thumb too far down, and I didn't realize until I went, and I cut quite a nice piece out of my thumb. Made very much of a mess. I don't use it for cutting wire. It will do it, but you know, I don't use it for that. But at a pinch, you know, you can use them. However, as I say, it can be quite dangerous. All of these tools really can be quite dangerous if they're used incorrectly. So do be careful, do bear it in mind. If you are using something like this, keep your finger well away from that secondary jaw, because you won't stop it and it will go through you like a knife through butter. Alright? Wire strippers. There's wire strippers out there which don't have that on there, they just have the stripping head. These again are Draper. So it's about finding what works for you, really. These are old. I've had them for many years, and they've never let me down. They're used tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of times per day. Never once failed me. I love these things. I could not live without these things. I really should buy a second pair, just in case. Okay, next up, when you need to measure and cut lines and things of that ilk. Now I use, all too frequently, just a standard little tiny 6-inch metal ruler, a vernier which does millimeters and inches for those of you who don't like to work in one or the other, and just a little set square. Very simple to use, nothing exotic about it. Some of you may or may not have seen them in the past. So you can measure an outside edge with that particular blade, and you can measure, let's see if we can find something, here we go. You can measure an inside diameter with that end. So verniers are very useful for getting accurate measurement. Very useful. Again, used almost every day. Just a standard ruler, nothing special about this. You've all seen these. This has just got millimeters and inches on. I don't know if you can see that. Is that focusing? Yeah, there we go. Millimeters and inches and etc. and so forth on. Set square, nothing special about that. We all know what a set square does and how it works. But I do find it, as I say, very useful. Just pop something on there, piece of plastic on there, score it. And with our secateurs, cut it. Job done. Or if you don't want to do it that way, obviously you can just make your mark, score it. When I'm scoring, I always score with the back of the blade, so it doesn't sink in too much. And if you do slip off the end, it's not going to be quite as much damage. Hopefully that's the plan anyway. So you can score it, stick your blade in, do a few pulls across it. And ABS is lovely, it will snap. So very often when I'm making squared pieces, that's how I will cut them. So you're left with the tiniest little piece of plastic, I suppose, covering the end, the outside edge, and then you can square everything up, and you've almost got everything set. Just glue it up and away you go. Again, use your Blu-Tack to hold it if you want to. It's perfect. See, I told you, every day, multiple times per day, multiple uses. So that's just some simple rulers that I use. And to finish off, because we all love this sort of thing, we have fire. Standard blowtorch. This is just the sort of thing that comes in a chef's kitchen. Nothing special about that. You'll see them using it for brulee and all sorts of stuff. Melting sugars. Just runs on butane gas, pumped into the bottom there. I use it specifically for, I'll grab a little piece of it here. There we go. So I use this for heat shrink. Now obviously the blowguns are great for places where you don't need to worry about the heat sink, actually, or the heat shrink rather, when it's not in a delicate area, for example. So I can just wrap it around a PCB, shrink it down. There we go. I'm not worried about any heat runoff because it's in the open air. You can see it makes very short work of it. So that's great. Just pull that off. There we go. If I don't want an open flame, I also have this little one. Again, it runs on butane gas, but it's a concealed flame, so there is literally no flame at the end. It's incredibly hot because it is pumping out, obviously, hot gases. But it's very much the same as that without the flame. Flame? No flame. So with this, you can get inside of things where you don't want the runoff from the flame. and you'll still get exactly the same performance because obviously it's hot gases. So just whack that on there. It's a little more controlled. You need to be a little closer too. And that's a good thing, because if you're working inside an environment where you don't want the heat from the flame going everywhere, then you can control what happens with this. A great tool, great tool. As well as that, again, when I'm working down inside the barrel of a gun, I may need something slightly longer. Now this is great. This is a gooseneck, a movable gooseneck mini blowtorch. Fantastic little thing. Again, runs off butane gas. And this is very useful if you have a particular sticky joint that won't release, or you can't get down inside to scrape off some glue. You could perhaps heat the glue with this down inside of a barrel, or if you have an awkward area that you need to get to, you don't have much finger space, you can feed it through, heat up whatever you need to heat up, nuts, bolts, whatever, and release them that way. Very useful, this thing. And it's also very good for lighting candles. In fact, that may even be what its original job was for, lighting candles. But there we go. Little gooseneck blowtorch. And finally, just a standard lighter, because that's useful too. You can just, if you want to do a quick job, there we go, just hold it over the heat shrink. And away it goes. Nothing big or clever about that. Okay, I do believe that's that. So those are the tools that I use, as I say, on a daily basis. There are others, of course. There is the soldering iron that I use. There's the type of solder that I use. In fact, I'll tell you what that is. This is my solder of choice. Okay. Can you read all the information on there? I think so. This is flux cord. But the run on this is really, really, really nice. You do get some solders which I've used. The flux content inside seems to be made of some odd compound, and it doesn't finish well. And you can tell when you have a good solder and a good flux, because you'll get a nice shiny joint. In fact, you can see on here. Hopefully, you can see on there. That's the kind of finish that you get. It's nice and shiny. Whereas some of the other solders that I've used with their particular flux core, there's something in there. I don't know what it is. I've not found out yet. But it doesn't finish as well. It doesn't give the shiny surface. And also the best way to explain it is it feels like a compromised joint. Like it would almost dry joint really, really quickly. Whereas this has never let me down. And so I buy copious amounts of this. I've got several reels in stock. And I will only ever use this from now on when I'm soldering. Fantastic stuff. Absolutely brilliant. I got this from eBay. Wasn't expensive. So roll off and get yourself some lead solder exactly like this by Yadacheng Tin Industry Co. You won't go wrong with it. Soldering iron, well, I'm sure you all have your own favourite soldering irons. I have a soldering station. It's called a Precision Gold A55KJ, and I run it at 400 degrees. Sorry, I couldn't remember that. I run it at 400 degrees because I like the end tip to be incredibly hot. Very rarely do you do any, certainly at this level, very rarely do you do any real micro soldering, but if you do, you can turn the tip down. It's not a problem, so you don't damage any components. Yeah, so there we go. I think we're probably there. Obviously, I haven't shown you the screwdrivers. Everyone knows about screwdrivers. Oh, actually, there is one thing I will also share before I go. Tape. Again, you will all have your own favorite tapes, but these are my particular type. This is just painter's masking tape, paper tape. Very, very good. I use either the yellow or the blue version. Entirely up to you, whatever's your preference. Blue can be slightly easier to work with than the yellow, I find, but either works just as well. This is just a thinner version of this. Obviously, this is all for masking. This is a slightly more almost vinyl or plastic feeling tape, but you can see that you can bend it and form it a lot easier than you can with the paper tape, because it has a slightly malleable feel to it. It's stretchy. You see that? You see it stretching? There we go. So you can form it a lot easier. Some very intricate lining tape. Again, this is paper, so it's nice and easy to use, just like the painter's masking tape. But by far my favourite tape is this. It's called Tessa tape, and it's a fabric tape, incredibly strong. I've really got to pull at it in order to break it. So you're better off, again, sharp scissors. Oopsie, there we go. Just cutting it. But this is fantastic stuff. It's completely what's the word I'm looking for? The word will come to me in a minute. I know it will. Insulated, that's the word. So you can use it as insulation tape, completely insulated, non-electrical conductive. It comes on larger rolls like this, and I bought masses of this stuff, and I use so much of it, it's ridiculous. A very good friend of mine introduced me to this a couple of years ago, and I have never looked back. This is the only tape that I use for every job that I do, and it's never ever let me down. Never degrades, never loses its pull once you wrap things up in it. Yeah, great stuff. So that's the tape, and that really does bring us to the end. Apart from to say again, Blu-Tack, because as well as all the other jobs that it does, it's a very good stress reliever as well. You can sit there while you're thinking and you can pull on the Blu-Tack and mess about with it. Who doesn't need a stress reliever in their life, huh? Anyway, there we go. I hope you found at least some of that informative, useful. Maybe there's some tools in there you've not seen before. Maybe there's some tools you've not thought before. Maybe there's tools you have yourself. Either way, I hope it was of some use. And from me to you, goodbye and see you soon. Take care.